Hey there guys, this is Obsidian Chill. Got another video for today. And as you're watching this video, you will have a newly released ally on live server, Poison Ivy. Now, originally this video, Poison Ivy's been on test for quite some time, but I've been waiting to publish my video because there's so many changes up in the air and redirection. And as of 3 days ago, May 15th, there was a most recent hotfix to adjust Poison Ivy's one of the abilities that had a major impact. So kind of glad I waited, and that's unfortunately why I have to wait for these releases on allies and artifacts, because rarely are they ever actually done or polished when they hit live server. So without further ado, we have Poison Ivy. So Nature's Grasp, the combat ability, launches vines that pull in nearby enemies before unleashing an explosion. We have the first passive ability, Empowering Spores. For 15 seconds, poisoning an enemy through superpower inflicts them with Empowering Spores. Whenever an enemy with Empowering Spores takes damage, it has a 20% chance to grant you a stack of Empowered Bloom, which grants 2% might and 1% precision, lasts 5 seconds, and refreshes the timer for all existing stacks. And at rank 10, you get up to 20 stacks with a 30-second cooldown. The next ability, which let's take off my supply drop because the scrolling is quite annoying on PC. We have Toxic Touch. So shields on you have a 25% chance to inflict attackers with Toxic Touch, reducing their damage and defenses for 12 seconds. Reduction percentages are different between when solo and when in a group. Cooldown 30 seconds. Solo 15% damage -5, and a group 10% damage, 2.5% defense. So without further ado, let's touch on the combat ability. We'll show the spreadsheets and then we'll get into the passives. Okay, so in taking a look at the damage of Poison Ivy, it falls in the bottom tier of the actual base damage, which is a common theme for allies that have somewhat secondary effects to their damage or combat ability. So in this case, Poison Ivy has that pull, which personally I feel like it's going to become more of an issue in combat, because as you saw how it pulled the sparring targets, if it can pull the sparring targets, it has the dominance cap on it. Also would pull anything that's 0 willpower. So really you're going to be yanking adds off the bot or off the tank, unless the Ivy teleports to the tank or teleports where the tank is with the adds and then pulls them. So it's one of those, like, it could be really annoying, it could be helpful for the tank, either way. The other thing is that because of that secondary passive, that Toxic Touch, which gives the debuff, there's no tank that would run this as a combat ability anyways. So Poison Ivy being in that bottom tier is not really a big deal, because a tank wouldn't run that as a combat ability, you'd be running the passive. I mean, I guess there's situations where you'd want to have like Lex and Superman shield and stuff like that. So I mean, it is situational, but I would say more often than not, you'd want that damage debuff and the defense debuff on the adds on NPCs rather than the pull. So as you can see, Poison Ivy, bottom tier for AoE on single target and on the actual NPC in combat sparring target. Not sparring target, but NPC boss. So this is the Injustice bounty. So really there's no reason to use Poison Ivy for damage. You're focusing more on the passives, which I'll show and get to in here. So taking a look at that, Poison Ivy's first passive, Empowering Spores. So for 15 seconds, poisoning an enemy through a superpower inflicts them with Empowering Spores. Whenever an enemy with Empowered Spores takes damage, it has a 20% chance to grant you a stack of Empowered Bloom that grants 2% might and 1% precision. Lasts for 5 seconds and refreshes the timer for all existing stacks to a max of 20 at rank 10 with a 30-second cooldown. So think of this as the easiest damage you'll ever find. So typically with like a might increase like that, you're looking at like an artifact like Amulet, E-Bomb, Tetra. When you have to equip the artifact, and when you do something, you get that might increase. Or when you're thinking allies, like say like your Shazam, when you activate a combat ability, it procs that might increase, or Batman Laughs where it's random. Where this one, you don't have to do anything. You're not changing your rotation. All you're doing is equipping it. So what it is that, so poisoning is the PI of the damage side. So releases poison, like a Briar releases poison, Vine Lash releases poison. And then you've got Voracious Plants, which poison take additional damage. And then you've got powers like Harvest and Thorn Burst, which spread and refresh it if you're not aware of nature damage. So for this, we'll set up the poison. As you can see, right now I've got this, empowered bloom thing on my head. You'll see the indicator. And then as I start DPSing, now you see my hands go red. And now I've got those stacks active. And all I'm doing, I'm not changing my rotation at all. So if you're regular Earth, you set up your 3 dots, go into Gorilla, Harvest and Gorilla, and then you're using your finisher and then Voracious Plants. So if you're a single target, then you could be using like Acro, Heat Vision, stuff like that. But this is, right now, we're just taking a look at the just regular AoE rotation. So how that works is with the stacks. So right now, we'll let this reset just before I get into the spreadsheets to show the damage and the might increase. So we're looking at my might right now is 237k. Wait for Gorilla to reset, and like I said, just going into my rotation like I normally would. 3 dots, I'm into Gorilla, I'm harvesting, and going into my rotation. And now if I look at my might here with the stacks, right now I'm at 311,000 might. So 237 to 311, and I'm not doing anything. That's just the Poison Ivy ally. So I'm not changing my rotation at all. Before you had to change your rotation because Harvest didn't actually refresh that poison, so you're constantly just spamming, refreshing your dots, even though you don't have to because they're gonna last for 12 seconds, which was awkward. But then on May 15th, which is what I mentioned at the beginning of the video, they changed that so Harvest will refresh the Poison Ivy effect. So then now you don't have to change your rotation at all. It's still the exact same. I mean, the issue, the prevailing issue here is that obviously every nature DPS has to have this. 100% Poison Ivy will be must level. We'll get into the spreadsheets here in a moment, but nature still has the same drawbacks as it did before. So you're still setting up your dots, having to go to a second form change, which is a 5k for both Gorilla and for Wolf form. Obviously, the Thorn Burst becomes, Impaling Thorns becomes an AoE in Gorilla. But at the time, say your group wipes, then you still gotta have Supercharge. So that's the thing. So, and then you still have situations where in raids where the bosses become invulnerable, like say in the first boss of Terrarium, those dots are gonna wipe because you can't refresh them. So you still have or there's just situations like in Roe when your ads just wipe randomly. So nature still has the same kind of prevailing issues. It's just that Poison Ivy just kind of makes up for that because you're getting a massive might increase for free. So let's jump into the spreadsheets and take actually a closer look at the numbers. Okay, so taking a closer look at the numbers here, my baseline rotation is the typical Gorilla rotation you'll find. I set up with 3 poisons, go into Gorilla, Harvest, just like I showed in the video clip, and then go into Harvest, Impaling Thorns, then do 3 Voracious Plants, back into Harvest, Impaling Thorns, and repeat. So the first parse is always going to include the Gorilla buff, and then after that it's going to be the regular rotation. So this is my baseline here. We did 6 30-second parsers. And then here, the second parse, I equipped, the only change I made was just equip a Poison Ivy ally. So my baseline might, this is with escalating might, was 240k. And just increasing, just adding the Poison Ivy ally, we'll go up to 316k. And then the other rotation I threw in was a human kind of variation. So I'm not using Gorilla form at all, not using Wolf, because there's going to be some instances where you just can't use Gorilla or Wolf because they're 5k supercharges. The Gemini is going to be changing in the future, so we may not have that kind of supercharged regen. And it's just not practical. You're always going to be in Gorilla or Wolf or proccing that. So I did a human form one with E-Bomb, because Voracious Plant Spam is a 100 power cost move, so it works perfectly well with E-Bomb. It just doesn't work well with Gorilla, because then you're constantly, no matter if you're using Gorilla for AoE or single target, you're always going to have Impaling Thorns, because that's the whole point of using Gorilla, because it's going to be an AoE finisher, which means that it's going to be an issue with Amulet and E-Bomb, because then it's going to lower your stacks and reset them. You can technically art swap off of E-Bomb or Amulet. You can't do both, obviously, but if you're running E-Bomb or Amulet or vice versa, or just one of them, you could technically art swap on, say, like Heat Vision on single target and then keep your finisher stacks. But I mean, then you're swapping an artifact every 4 seconds, which is not practical in content. So that's why I didn't really mention that. So this is basically with the E-bomb rotation, all I'm doing is Voracious Plants 5 times, then harvest. So setting up my 3 dots, Voracious Plants, or 3 dots, harvest, Voracious Plants 5 times, harvest, and just repeat. So then you could technically put like Neovenom on. You've got a little bit more choices because you don't have to necessarily use Wolf or Gorilla. In terms of the damage breakdown, as you can see here, so my baseline rotation over that 30 seconds was about 10 mil, 10.5 mil, and then just adding ally. I didn't change artifacts, didn't change my rotation. All I did was simply add the ally, and I got an 18.5% increase in damage. So, and like I said before, there's no perfect combination with allies. So Emperor Aquaman is going to become not useless, but not as beneficial because the Eye of the Gemini change is going to happen sooner than later. Don't ask me when, there's no date on it, but it's going to happen sooner or later. So then Emperor Aquaman is not necessarily going to be in the top 2. Shazam procs off your combat app ally, so I mean that is helpful. Batman Laughs is still the card proc, which is RNG. So really, there's always a spot for Poison Ivy if you're a nature DPS. And then if I'm using my human form, just with the Ivy and the E-bomb spam, even that is almost it's a 12.5% increase over my baseline. So no matter what situation you place it in, Ivy is a giant increase in damage for a nature DPS. And it's not too bad, obviously, as we will see, for the toxic touch for the tank. So everyone's going to ask, is this going to become meta? Is everyone going to switch to nature DPS? That's what I can't answer with this. It's certainly something, once I get up to 414 CR, I'll try switching nature and DPS with it, and then hopefully bring you a video and kind of compare, or if other people are doing DPS comps, I'll show that, or maybe even get a video clip from them to show you. Nature DPS in content is its own enemy. And what I mean by that is, like I described before, there's content where your dots are going to reset. There's content where you might wipe for like a group wipe. You're going to lose supercharge. Then you're not going to get into gorilla form and have to waste time in human or wait for the regen to come up. There's going to be instances where you can't refresh the dots, or say the ad waves die and you can't refresh them. Then you got to drop out of gorilla, set up your dots, go back into gorilla. Nature can be awkward sometimes. It can be very great because, I mean, strategy card procs, like transformation and strat, is like a live and die by nature because of all those dot ticks. So on AoE, nature is amazing. It can be very amazing and has been very amazing in the past. The only thing is I don't know is if this is going to be enough to push it over, like say like electric prec or gadgets prec or munitions. It certainly has the potential because, like I said, E-bomb, my might goes from a baseline of 240k to 375k, and that's just myself. That's not using like a Tetra buff or the claw buff from a controller in a raid. So your might's going to be through the roof. So your strat procs are through the roof. Your damage is going to be through the roof. It's just whether or not content is going to allow you, because nature doesn't have a lot of burst. You do earn the stacks very quickly, so you'll have that might very quickly. But like I said, you had the burst damage from Wolf because then you're using like Whirling Dervish, you're using like Vortex Trap, you're using Thornburst, the shield. So nature Wolf form was always the best with burst damage, but now Wolf form is a 5k, you don't have that same kind of stats. You can certainly get away, I'm sure, with Thornburst is being burst, but it's just going to be one of those. Now that Thornburst and Harvest reset it, now you can go back to say like Dervish and Vortex Trap, melee rotation. So I think nature can certainly work. It's going to be fine in just a competitive, like more like a comp rotation, but certainly this is going to push nature DPS to the top tier of might DPSing for sure, along with like munitions, for example, or electric AoE. Like nature AoE is going to be much better with Poison Ivy than electric AoE for might. How it's going to impact precision, I'm not too sure. Nature precision is a little bit awkward with the nature dot ticks, because then you get a might ticks, which could proc your strat card, and strat card might is going to tick proc lower than it will for your precision strat proc. So like I said, it's going to be, Poison Ivy is going to be a must-have 100% level if you're a nature DPS, and then it's going to be pretty helpful as a tank. Like if I was a tank only, I would still level Poison Ivy 100% because of that toxic touch, which you'll see later in the video if you haven't already. But whether or not nature is now going to be like meta DPS, meta comp DPS, that's what I can't answer yet, because it's obviously on test server. We can't really compare it against like Gadget Prec, Electric Prec, stuff like that. Or there's content where it just doesn't work. There is content where nature can do really well, like if there's multiple bosses or ads, because then you can easily spread the damage to those and keep it up. Where like say like a Gadget Prec DPS will be single target mainly with Flurry Shot, where you can easily spread out all that damage across everything else and keep it active. So that's what we'll have to wait and see if it's going to be meta DPS. But Poison Ivy, the way they're making these power set allies is incredibly powerful for the power sets themselves. So take care, guys. If you have any questions or concerns, put them in the comment section below, and we'll see you in the next video. So taking a look at the second passive, Toxic Touch. We have shields on you have a 25% chance to inflict attackers with Toxic Touch, reducing their damage and defenses for 12 seconds. Reduction percentages are different between when solo and in group, just like it is with Flashpoint Batman with Soul Detective, same concept. And the main thing to take away from this is that when it refers to 10% damage and 2.5% defense, that's the controller debuffs. So just think of you as like a debuff tank. So that 10% damage will stack with the 10% attack debuff from a controller, and the 2.5% defense will stack with all the other controller debuffs that you would have active. So we're talking like Toxic Encore from Batman No Last, we're talking Heartbreak Trinket, we're talking Amulet of Rao, all those debuffs that I've covered in previous videos now will stack again with this 2.5% defense. So that's why it's 2.5% defense is low. It was higher on test originally with Poison Ivy, but that's just completely broken because of how you're not actually doing anything, you're not using an ability. This is just a completely passive ability as a tank, and that's where it becomes so strong. So we'll kind of show an example here. It's difficult to find a bounty that actually has ads. I think I can spawn or get the ones with a giant metal bat to spawn, but you'll see right away with the animation. The main thing I wanted to show you is that it also takes effect on bosses as well. So it's attacking me. Each shield has a 25% chance, which will last for 12 seconds with a 30-second cooldown. As you can see there, see that kind of flower petals on its head? And you just saw the debuffs, defense and attack. So those are going to stay up for 12 seconds, and then they're going to drop, and then I have within that 30-second cooldown, and it's going to apply again. So where this becomes really advantageous to a tank is that you aren't doing it. You're popping shields anyway, and this is the text said shields on you as well, which means that any kind of healer shield on you is going to proc that as well. So it doesn't matter if a healer pops a shield on you, if the healer uses like say group supercharge. I believe the only bugged one is Electric's group transducer. That wasn't working properly on test. They may have changed that. See right now it's applied again. So the advantage here, and if the giant metal bat doesn't spawn ads, then I'll show an example too with that. I was just trying to quickly think of a bounty that had a whole bunch of ads that would proc that, but I think I just have to do probably X amount of damage for it to spawn. But either way, the advantage here is that it's a completely passive ability. You're not actually doing anything just to proc that. So, for example, when I would take a look at, not going to get hit here. So, taking a look at the other, say, tank allies. Lex Luthor had been recommended for a long time. Basically, when your health drops below 50%, you have the extra stats. Now, when you think about it, you may not necessarily be in a group where your health is going to drop below 50%. And even then, the stats help you, but they'll not necessarily actually be beneficial. So what if you take like a massive amount of damage from a boss, your health drops below 50%, you get the Lex Luthor boost, but then the boss does nothing or goes through a different phase, or you get healed from like a page proc. Those stats didn't really help you. They didn't have any effect. So the Superman shield, yes, that's still great. That's damage reduction. Personally, that's a little bit difficult to fit on some tanks just because you have to run the breakout. But when you have Poison Ivy here as an ally, yes, it's a nature-specific ally, which is unfortunate because you'll never be able to use Empowering Spores as a tank. But this Toxic Touch becomes extremely useful because it's completely passive. It'll proc throughout the entire boss fight. Every 30 seconds, you're going to be proccing this ability for an extra attack debuff and a defense debuff. So it just helps the group that much more because it's going to stack with everything else. The DPS are going to be doing more damage. You're going to be taking less damage from the boss and all the other ads because of that extra stacking debuff. So it just becomes a situation where, I don't want to say it's a must-have because obviously you can complete content without it. You don't need that for survivability. It's just one of those things that you can help the group. But let's quickly show an example of how it is with a bunch of ads, and then let's show that here. Okay, so we got an example here in the park. Let me just kind of gather up some ads here. So same thing, pay attention for that kind of flower petal effect. So we got the flower petal 1, we got another 3 there being affected. Same thing if I pull these in, guys, and we pop Harlot Shield, you see eventually each ad or each NPC is going to be covered with this Toxic Touch. So once again, like I said, even if you have boss, if you have ads, you're constantly taking that extra stacking attack debuff and the defense debuff on all the ads. So that means ads get cleared faster because they have got that debuff on them. You take less damage from bosses, or take less damage from bosses and ads at the same time. So it just becomes, I don't want to say like an overpowered build because obviously, like I said, you could keep juggling the ads. It doesn't matter. They're not necessarily going to attack you. You can always stun them with chromatic emitter, stuff like that. So like I said, it's not a mandatory ability, but it's one of those abilities where it's completely passive. You don't have to do anything, and it helps the group the entire time because it's less damage you're taking. They're doing more damage. Ads get cleared faster. Say if you're in like a TT on this current raid, the Terrarium raid, last boss with Desad and all his ads. Well, you're taking less damage from Desad, you're taking less damage from the ads, and the ads die faster because they got an extra stacking debuff on them. And you don't have to do anything special. All you're doing is popping a shield. Your healers are popping a shield. So, like I said, it's a very, very beneficial ally for the group. But like I said, don't feel like you're pressured to be mandatory. It's just one of those things where it's definitely going to help. Now, that being said, it's not necessarily a tank ally because, like I said, shields on you have a 25% chance. So it's any shield on you. So if you are a controller, you can still proc it with your own shields. If a healer shield's on the group, they can proc that. The only thing is, like, the key point being attackers. So if you're in, say, like an alert, if you're in any kind of content where you don't have a tank, then yes, it can be beneficial because you still get to proc it. You may not actually need it for survivability or for killing the ads faster, but you do have the ability to proc it in that fight. Actually, let me just show here. That was convenient, just with those two spawning. So now we can kind of show so now right away we've got Toxic Touch on Dr. Light, and eventually we're going to have it on Gizmo. Yeah, it's on Gizmo now, so same thing. So any kind of boss NPC, any kind of ads that are out there, you're going to have it applied. I don't want to say it's, because the thing is, it's a nature ally, which is nature DPS, but then it's a tank ally because of Toxic Touch. So it's one of those like confusing things where obviously if you're a tank, you're never going to go nature, so it's not applicable to you. But at the same time, Toxic Touch is so helpful that really you can afford to drop like Lex Luthor or let's say Batman or Laughs. If you still run the Superman shield for Elite Plus, you still can, but it becomes even stronger in Elite Plus because that's extra damage that A, you're not taking, and B, the group is doing more damage in Elite Plus to kill those enemies faster or kill the bosses. So it's one of those things where, they're making it really powerful because it's great for DPS, and then it's also just as great for tanks, but the DPS is just for nature. So it's one of those things where I'll certainly level it. Like I said, each and every ally, it's not mandatory that you have the group Superman shield for Elite Plus or Elite content. It's not mandatory to have the Lex Luthor stat buffs. It's one of those things where it becomes very helpful. And not only is Poison Ivy helpful for yourself, but it's also helpful for the group. So it's certainly something that I would consider leveling. I know it's a legendary. Wait for a sale, build up your XP, however have you, but it's definitely the way to have it as in Toxic Touch and Empowering Spores. It covers you not only for DPS if you're going to ever switch nature, but it also covers you as a tank.